Success begins as a horizon we chase, a promise shimmering beyond the next effort, the next sacrifice, the next dawn we wrestle from the night. It is an idea we are taught to court, a narrative stitched through childhood ambitions, classroom lessons, mentors' encouragement, and the ceaseless drumbeat of cultural symbols. We are told that success is a staircase, and the noble task of life is to climb, rung after rung, until we can finally look out and say we have arrived. Yet as many discover, quietly, sometimes painfully, the summit often feels less like a vantage point and more like a narrow room with walls that move inward. The paradox is not that success fails to deliver life's goods, but that it can deliver them with an interest rate we do not anticipate, an invisible lien on our time, identity, and freedom. When achievement becomes the foundation upon which our self-worth rests, when external validation or material proof are the only measures that count, success can change shape. It ceases to be a portal to possibility and can begin to resemble a prison whose bars are not steel but story, not chains but commitments we never examined but now cannot imagine breaking. If you're finding value in this reflection, consider subscribing now so you won't miss future episodes exploring how to live with depth, clarity, and courage. The prison of success often forms gradually, brick by brick, mortar-less but sturdy, built with choices that seem minor at the time. We say yes to opportunities because they signal momentum. We work late because it signals dedication. We take on more visibility because it signals importance. Signals accumulate. Rewards follow. At first, the reinforcement feels affirming. A promotion, an endorsement, a growing platform, a balance sheet climbing upward. None of this is wrong. Indeed, much of it reflects admirable diligence and talent. The trap is not in the work or the rewards themselves, but in the unexamined assumption that more is always better, that the upward curve is synonymous with meaning, and that deviation from this trajectory equals failure. Without noticing, one can begin to trade discretion for momentum, depth for breadth, presence for performance. Duties replicate, expectations compound, and soon the ship that once felt swift and responsive becomes heavy with cargo, harder to steer, costly to slow. The cruelest irony is that the very strengths that enabled the ascent, discipline, ambition, resilience, can mask the early warning signs that everything meaningful is shrinking around the glow of the career or project that now consumes the center. Consider the athlete whose global recognition rests on split-second execution, or the physician whose clinical outcomes, awards, and research grants have become shorthand for her identity. Consider the entrepreneur who sold a company and now inhabits a public myth that demands every subsequent venture be bigger, faster, more disruptive than the last. Each wakes to a life prized by others, admired by colleagues and strangers alike. Each also faces a private arithmetic known only through lived experience, a calendar that no longer includes unstructured time, a sense that rest equals risk, relationships that are maintained like obligations rather than enjoyed like gifts, a creeping worry that the real me is disappearing beneath the brand of me. It is not inevitable, but it is common. The sociologist might note that success confers status capital that creates both leverage and pressure. The psychologist might note that external rewards tilt our motivational landscape from intrinsic curiosity toward extrinsic compliance. The philosopher might suggest that instrumental rationality, treating everything as means to an end, colonizes domains of life that should remain as ends in themselves. None of these analyses condemns success. They simply warn that over-identification with any single source of worth narrows the self. We often imagine prisons as sites of coercion, but most success prisons are built by consent. We give our time because it feels honorable. We accept the metrics because they seem objective. We welcome the spotlight because it seems to confirm our belonging. And yet, beneath consent can be fear. Fear that stepping sideways or slowing down will cause the audience to vanish. Fear that refusing an invitation will mark us as ungrateful. Fear that letting go of one ambition will mean we have wasted the years devoted to it. A sunk cost fallacy with moral texture. Fear that, if we are not remarkable, we will not be loved. This fear is not a flaw of character. It is a feature of human nervous systems that learned, across centuries, that belonging kept us alive. But in modern economies and digital ecosystems, belonging is often mediated by metrics, followers, views, bonuses, rankings, each a token that is easier to count than the quality of a conversation. the touch of a friend's hand, the quiet pride of doing less but better. When our survival circuitry confuses the platform with the village, we can become caught in cycles of performance that feel compulsory even when they are technically optional. Data can be clarifying here. Longitudinal research on well-being, such as the Harvard study of adult development, has repeatedly found that the deepest predictors of flourishing in later life are the vitality of relationships and a sense of purpose tied to contribution and growth, not the accumulation of prestige markers. Cross-cultural studies reveal that after basic needs are met and a buffer of security is achieved, additional income yields sharply diminishing returns on subjective well-being. Yet most career tracks are designed with an incentive gradient that keeps pointing up, long after the curve has flattened. This creates a cognitive dissonance. We pursue outcomes that offer less and less nourishment while neglecting inputs, connection, rest, learning for its own sake, that quietly build a life resilient to volatility. The dissonance is not instantly visible because the rewards of overwork arrive quickly and loudly, while the costs arrive slowly and quietly. A lowered threshold for joy, the erosion of curiosity, the loss of wonder. Success constrains not only how we spend our days but also what we dare to imagine. When we become the go-to person for a given domain, reputation consolidates. Reliability is rewarded with more of the same kind of responsibility. The world loves a reliable specialist. So do organizations. But identity can become overfitted to a narrow set of capabilities. Overfitting is a useful term for machine learning. A model that memorizes patterns in the training data, performs impressively in familiar conditions but generalizes poorly to new ones. In human terms, success can overfit ourselves to particular environments, making adaptability harder precisely when it becomes most necessary. When markets shift, technologies disrupt, or personal circumstances change, those who have practiced only one kind of excellence may struggle to reconfigure their sense of self around a different axis. It is not a failure of intelligence. It is the predictable cost of an identity optimized for a single scenario. The antidote is not to avoid mastering anything but to keep mastery porous, to pair the honing of a craft with the cultivation of multiple centers of meaning. There is also the moral dimension. Success can distort the field of responsibility. With increased leverage comes wider impact. With wider impact comes the need for clearer ethics. Yet the speed and complexity of high-status roles can make careful reflection feel like a luxury. Small compromises dice the boundary between principle and pragmatism. Just this once can become policy. The vitamin of praise can become addictive, making dissent feel like a threat to supply. When we are applauded for outcomes alone, methods can degrade unnoticed. And when our livelihoods are tied to the maintenance of a certain narrative, it becomes difficult to welcome the truths that would complicate that narrative. Organizations are especially vulnerable to this. They build brands around leaders and then curate reality to protect both brand and leader from dissonant facts. Individuals, too, self-curate. They publish a story about their work that edits out the nights of doubt, the collateral costs, the unreturned calls. The result is pressure to not merely succeed but to look like the kind of person who succeeds effortlessly, which compounds the prison's sense of isolation. If the public believes you to be invulnerable, where can you go with your vulnerability? Another bar on the window is the idea of irreversibility. Past a certain point in a career, it feels impossible to change course. There are dependents, employees, expectations. The infrastructure of a life, mortgages, school fees, equity vesting schedules, becomes a set of anchors. This is real, we should not minimize it. And yet, the perception that we cannot alter trajectory can become a self-fulfilling story. Many who have made midlife or late-life transitions describe the terror of stepping off the known path and the grief of closing chapters. But they also describe the return of oxygen. They speak of rediscovering their curiosity, rekindling dormant talents, and building communities around shared practice rather than shared status. The lesson is not that everyone should pivot, but that the imagination must remain elastic. A person can honor commitments without surrendering sovereignty. Even within the same field, one can redefine success away from scale and toward craft, away from constant growth and toward enduring quality, away from breadth of attention and toward depth of contribution. In assessing whether success is becoming a prison, a useful exercise is to examine the ratio of doing to being, of external signal to internal signal. How often are decisions made by consulting your own values, energy, and system of meaning versus checking the scoreboard of external approval? How much of your calendar represents genuine yes rather than fear-based compliance? How often do you experience the state psychologists call flow, a fully absorbed engagement in a challenging, meaningful activity, versus the dull vigilance of constant monitoring, emails, and meetings that summarize other meetings? Flow correlates with well-being because it unites competence and curiosity. It requires presence, which is incompatible with self-objectification. If your days lack these conditions, you may be managing an image rather than making a life. That is not a condemnation, only a compass reading. Compasses do not shame, they reorient. Examples illuminate the contours. A celebrated chef builds an empire of restaurants, television shows, and product lines. At first, the expansion funds experimentation. Over time, the brand requires consistency at scale, and the chef finds herself approving packaging designs more often than developing new recipes. A musician becomes synonymous with a particular sound that sells. Every deviation alarms the market. The label hedges risk. Tour schedules maximize revenue. The musician's guitar becomes a prop rather than an instrument. A public interest lawyer wins landmark cases and becomes essential to a movement. Donor expectations shape strategy. Countless hours shift from legal work to fundraising and media. Each scenario contains honor and pride. Each also contains hidden costs. The slow displacement of craft by commerce, of mission by maintenance. None of this implies cynicism. It suggests that freedom requires structural protection. Talent alone cannot defend itself from the force fields of growth. Structural protection starts with language, because language shapes perception. When individuals and organizations define success using only metrics that scale, revenue, reach, headcount, rankings, they obscure other dimensions that require stewardship. A more humane grammar includes measures of depth, the percentage of time spent in core craft versus peripheral management, the number of hours allocated to exploration and learning, the health of relationships as assessed not by frequency of contact but by trust and mutuality, the degree to which one's work aligns with articulated values, the quality of attention experienced while working. These are harder to quantify, but they can be tracked with rigor. Research in organizational psychology supports the efficacy of leading indicators, inputs we can control, over trailing indicators, outputs we cannot fully control. For individuals, leading indicators might include sleep consistency, time in nature, focus blocks without digital interruption, and scheduled no-meeting days. These do not guarantee success, but they reduce the likelihood that success will hollow out one's center. Another strategy is to cultivate asset diversification within the self. Financial advisors recommend not placing all capital into a single class. The same holds for identity. A life that anchors worth in multiple practices, family roles, community engagement, creative hobbies, spiritual disciplines, physical pursuits, spreads risk. When one domain wobbles, others can steady us. Diversification is not mere busyness. It is intentional plurality. It is making room for alternative forms of excellence that are immune to market cycles and audience whims. The parent who reads stories at bedtime has a form of success not captured by a resume. The neighbor who organizes a quiet ritual of care for the bereaved practices a success invisible to metrics yet vital to a healthy society. These successes do not compete with professional achievement. They humanize it. Boundaries are not walls that keep life out. They are architecture that makes life inhabitable. The person who says, "I do not respond to emails after 7 p.m., or "I take a walk alone after lunch," or "I turn down engagements that require me to speak beyond my expertise," is not being difficult. They are designing a habitat in which their best work and best self can survive. Enforceable boundaries clarify expectations for others and free cognitive bandwidth for doing what matters. Without boundaries, success permissions sprawl. Everything becomes urgent and everyone becomes entitled to your time. The brave truth is that many professional ecosystems will consume as much as you let them. Some will respect your limits. Some will test them. If your livelihood depends on pleasing everyone, you have built a brittle system. If your esteem depends on pleasing everyone, you have built a brittle self. Recalibration often requires a reckoning with the narratives we carry from childhood. Many of us were praised for outcomes more than for effort, curiosity, or kindness. We learned to associate love with achievement. This is not to indict our families or teachers. They often praised us the way society taught them to. But as adults, we can choose to affirm ourselves differently. We can say, I am proud not because the world clapped, but because I acted in alignment with my values. I am satisfied not because I outran someone, but because I did not betray myself. This interior reparenting is not self-indulgence. It is foundation work. It allows us to hold success lightly enough to use it well. Without it, we clutch too tightly, defending our status against imagined threats, unable to rest. An additional pressure arises from digital visibility. In prior generations, success often carried social recognition within a local community. Now, platforms make success both performative and comparative at scale. Every achievement is instantly juxtaposed with the achievements of thousands of others, curated for maximum shine. The algorithm alters our sense of norm and pace. We feel behind, even when we are thriving. We publish updates not only to inform but to reassure ourselves that we are still relevant. The platform rewards frequency, which punishes depth. The way out is not total rejection. Many find genuine community and opportunity online, but disciplined participation. Treat platforms as tools, not habitats. Decide in advance the role you want them to play, the time you are willing to give, the boundaries you will keep. Remember that the quiet work that truly moves the needle in your life will not be visible there, and that is all right. To prevent success from becoming a prison, we must interrogate the telos, the end toward which it is aimed. Success is good if it enables a life worthy of the finite days we are allotted. It is corrupting if it demands those days as payment. A worthy life has room for wonder, for absurd laughter, for grief fully felt, for art made without audience, for walks with no destination, for meals that take longer to prepare than to eat, for conversations that unfold without agenda, for the dignity of saying no, for the humility of starting again. It has room for the elasticity to change one's mind. It honors seasons, times to sow and times to rest, times to expand and times to consolidate. Industrial metaphors, growth, scale, throughput, do not map cleanly onto a heart that needs Sabbath. Popular culture sometimes portrays rest as a reward for productivity, but physiologically and spiritually, rest is a precondition for clarity. Only out of stillness can we hear whether the life we are building is the one we want. All of this may sound like a retreat from ambition. It is not. The world needs ambitious people, deeply ambitious, in fact, but the object of ambition matters. Be ambitious for integrity, for mastery, for service. Be ambitious for a life that keeps you kind. Swap the ambition to appear big for the ambition to be whole. A whole person can take on vast responsibilities without collapsing inside them. A fragmented person can turn even modest success into a source of anxiety. This reorientation does not diminish impact. It compounds it. People who calibrate success to the texture of their values build trust, and trust is a force multiplier. Teams led by such people not only perform, they grow. Communities served by such people not only benefit, they are ennobled. The dividends of this approach show up not in quarterly reports but in the long arc of a life remembered with gratitude by those it touched. The path from prison back to possibility is not a single leap. It is a series of small permissions granted to oneself. Permission to be a beginner again, to learn a skill with no intention of monetizing it. Permission to leave emails unanswered because you were listening to a child or to the rain. Permission to set an out-of-office reply without apology. Permission to disappoint people whose approval you can survive living without. Permission to prize what is slow and local and unscalable. Permission to practice the art of enough. Enough is not a ceiling that diminishes our potential. It is a floor that steadies our step. Without it, chasing more becomes compulsive. With it, we can choose more for a reason rather than out of reflex. Let us imagine a different calibration of success, one that treats the self not as a servant of the resume but as a steward of a finite, luminous life. Imagine a ledger in which you track the quality of your attention as carefully as you track your net worth, where distractions are accounted for like leakages and wonder is logged like a dividend. Imagine meetings in which teams ask not only what will we deliver, but what kind of people will we become in the delivering? Imagine promotions that recognize the ability to create healthy environments as much as the ability to increase output. Imagine families where the question at dinner is not, "What did you achieve today?" but, "What did you notice?" Imagine choosing projects not only because they are high profile but because they deepen your craft and expand your compassion. This is not utopian. It is practical. Environments shaped by these questions prove more resilient, innovative, and humane. Sometimes what unlocks the cell is grief. A loss arrives, the end of a relationship, the death of a loved one, a diagnosis, and the narrative of endless ascent collapses. In the rubble, we find truths we were too busy to hold. Grief reorders priorities without asking permission. It thins the membrane between the self and the world. It reminds us that mortality is the only deadline that truly matters. For some, grief catalyzes a radical simplification. They prune obligations, they cancel appearances, they hand the microphone to others, they go home. For others, grief deepens their commitment to work but changes the motive. They serve not to be seen but because they cannot imagine doing otherwise. In both cases, success ceases to be theater and becomes texture. The prison door swings because the lock was, in part, inside us all along. There is also joy as a key. Joy is not the same as pleasure. Pleasure is easily purchased and quickly spent. Joy is recognition, a sudden clarity that life is good not because it is easy but because it is alive, because we can participate in it with our whole selves. Joy arrives in glimpses. A sunrise that no one else notices, a line of music that makes you close your eyes, an ordinary meal with extraordinary conversation. People who have made peace with enough report that joy becomes more available. This is not mystical. It is attentional. If your mind is always measuring, joy has no ground on which to land. If your mind is occasionally empty of measurement, joy slips in, sits down, and stays a while. Returning to practices that cultivate attention, meditation, prayer, slow reading, walking without a phone, strengthens our capacity to inhabit the moment success cannot manufacture. Finally, there is courage. Not the cinematic kind, but the daily kind, the courage to be honest with yourself before you are forced to be honest by circumstances, the courage to say no without elaborate explanations, the courage to accept the finitude of time and choose accordingly, the courage to leave some talents unexploited and some applause unheard. Courage is not a trait some have and others lack. It is a muscle built by use. Each small act of alignment strengthens it. Over time, the prison's walls thin. The window opens. The horizon returns. The second half of this reflection turns toward practice. How to keep success spacious. How to prevent the scaffolding of achievement from hardening into bars. The aim is not to offer a formula, lives are too varied for that, but to sketch a repertoire of moves that, together, create a life that can breathe. If the first part mapped the terrain of risk, this part sketches roads through it, with the understanding that every person's route will be shaped by their obligations, resources, and non-negotiable values. The organizing principle is simple. Design for aliveness. Build systems that protect what makes you feel most awake and most at peace. Let success be a tool that supports those systems, not the sovereign that commands them. Begin with an audit of commitments through the lens of alignment. Listing responsibilities is common. Assessing their soul cost is rarer. For each major obligation, ask, what value does this serve? Does it serve it directly or only symbolically? Does it generate energy or only consume it? Is it a bridge to a future I want or a cul-de-sac I am driving because I fear the U-turn? If you dread something repeatedly and cannot identify a compelling reason to keep doing it beyond inertia or image, that is a signal. Courageous professionals conduct these audits quarterly. They do not wait for burnout to issue its ultimatum. In a study of high-performing teams, researchers found that periodic stop-doing lists were as predictive of sustained excellence as aggressive goal setting. The absence of pruning leads to resource starvation where it matters most. A tree that refuses to shed leaves in winter will snap under the snow. From alignment, move to cadence. The unsustainable rhythm of always-on productivity is not a new complaint, but it remains an unlearned lesson in many sectors. Cadence is about cycles. Intense sprints followed by real recovery, seasons of expansion followed by seasons of consolidation. It is instructive that elite athletes spend a disproportionate amount of time on recovery. Sleep, nutrition, mobility, low-intensity work. They understand that growth happens during rest as the body integrates stress into strength. Knowledge workers, creators, and leaders often pretend the brain and heart are exempt. They are not. Build recovery into the architecture of your week and year. Protect one day with no external obligations. Schedule sabbaticals in microform if macroform is impossible. A week each quarter devoted to learning, reflection, and unstructured exploration. Leaders who model this grant permission down the chain, shifting culture from one that idolizes exhaustion to one that respects sustainability. Attention management is the next pillar. A prison is, among other things, a regime of constant surveillance. The modern version is self-imposed. We carry devices that summon us at all hours. Each ping is an invitation to fracture. A practical protocol. Define 2 or 3 protected focus blocks each day, 90 minutes maximum, during which devices are silenced and notifications off. During these blocks, work on the tasks that require depth, writing, designing, thinking, solving. The rest of the day can host meetings, correspondence, logistics. This is not new advice, but its consistent application distinguishes those who remain connected to craft from those who drift into perpetual coordination. If your role is primarily managerial, identify what constitutes craft for you, setting direction with clarity, mentoring with presence, making decisions with principle, and treat that as deep work. Protecting focus is not selfish. It is stewardship of your unique contribution. Without it, your calendar becomes the place where other people's priorities go to devour your potential. The social architecture around you matters enormously. Success can create asymmetries in relationships. Power accrues, and with it the risk of isolation. People may tell you what they think you want to hear. Curate a circle that refuses to flatter. Seek friends who are unimpressed by your resume and deeply impressed by your character. If your circle consists mostly of competitors, collaborators, or subordinates, expand it to include truth-tellers who have nothing to gain by appeasing you. Consider a personal board of advisors, 3 to 5 people across different domains whom you trust to challenge your thinking and hold your commitments accountable. Meet twice a year with a simple agenda. What matters most now? What commitments align? What must be pruned? What are we pretending not to know? The act of saying these things aloud, in a context of trust, collapses the distance between intention and action. A note on money, because the fear of financial insecurity often underwrites the prison. Establishing enough in quantitative terms calms the nervous system. Work with a fiduciary planner if possible to calculate your personal freedom number, the level of savings and passive income that covers essentials, and a modest margin. Knowing this figure transforms decision-making. Opportunities can be evaluated not solely for their payout, but for their alignment and learning value. Paradoxically, clarifying enough can increase earnings over time because it allows you to say a clean no to misaligned work, preserving energy for bold, high-fit bets. Financial simplicity is a lever. Fewer fixed expenses mean less pressure to accept everything that pays. People who live below their success often live above their fear. Craft integrity is both anchor and compass. If your work involves making code, policy, stories, products, define standards that are independent of reception. What does good look like to you? What constitutes excellence in this craft by your lights, even if the market would accept less? Write it down. Share it with your team. Let these standards guide decisions when trade-offs arise. Many prisons are built by drifting standards. Shortcuts normalized under deadline pressure become habits. A clear, shared definition of quality provides a backbone when expediency beckons. This does not mean perfectionism. It means fidelity. Perfectionism is fear dressed as rigor. Fidelity is love wearing discipline. The former punishes. The latter protects. Identity work must accompany system design. Ask who you are becoming because of how you're succeeding. If the answer makes you uneasy, pause. In narrative therapy, there is a technique called externalization. separating the problem from the person. You might say, the hustle wants me to work 14-hour days, rather than, I have to work 14-hour days. This slight shift creates space to negotiate. You can bargain with the hustle. You cannot bargain with a presumed necessity. Similarly, name the voices within. The admirer who craves applause, the guardian who seeks safety, the artist who longs for originality, the healer who prioritizes care. Invite them into conversation. Which voice have you been letting drive? Which needs to be heard? You are the chair of this internal board. To govern well, you must listen and then decide. The body is an honest witness. Many success stories are negotiated in abstractions, but the body keeps score, to borrow Bessel van der Kolk's phrase. Track signals. Persistent tightness in the chest, jaw clenching, shallow breathing, headaches that arrive on Sundays, insomnia that spikes before presentations, the sick day you never take because there is no time. These are not mere inconveniences. They are letters from your future self asking you to renegotiate terms. Respond with practices that restore regulation. Breathwork, strength training, yoga, long walks, cold water, saunas, dance, whatever fits. Movement is not a luxury adjunct to a healthy lifestyle. It is a keystone habit that improves cognition, mood, and resilience. Leaders who train their bodies train their minds to stay with discomfort without panic and to return to baseline after stress. This capacity reduces the likelihood that success-induced pressure will calcify into chronic anxiety. Rituals create containers for meaning. In a world measured by calendars and metrics, ritual asserts that some things are worthwhile outside of utility. Consider beginning the week with a personal check-in. A page of longhand writing answering 3 prompts. What truth am I avoiding? What would make this week feel meaningful? Where will I put my best attention? End the week by noting 3 moments of integrity. Times you acted in alignment despite pressure. Mark transitions with small rites. A candle lit at the start of focused work. A deliberate breath before opening your inbox. A brief walk after shutting your laptop to signal to your nervous system that you are no longer on call. Shared rituals help teams as well. A daily 2-minute gratitude round. A monthly story-sharing session about a mistake turned into learning. Rituals give texture to time. They are the difference between living days and inhabiting them. Creativity thrives on inputs. If your intake consists only of your field's discourse and the news cycle, your outputs will become derivative and your spirit fatigued. Cross-pollinate. Read outside your domain. Study a craft that requires hands. Learn from disciplines that measure success differently from your own. Artists borrow from scientists. Scientists learn from poets. Entrepreneurs learn from educators. Educators from chefs. Exposure to other models of excellence widens your imagination about what counts. It also relativizes your metrics. When you spend an afternoon with a luthier who hand-shapes an instrument over months, the pressure to produce an endless stream of content can loosen. When you read a historian who labored a decade on a book, the quarterly rhythm feels less tyrannical. The goal is not to adopt their timelines, but to let their patience inoculate you against frenzy. Service is a solvent for ego. When success begins to bend inward, narrowing your field of care to your image and interests, service reorients you toward others. Volunteer work that demands presence but yields no status is especially potent. Offer your skills invisibly. Help a neighbor with paperwork. Mentor someone with no social capital to offer in return. Show up for community maintenance. This is not about moral posturing. It is about soul hygiene. Service punctures the illusion that the world revolves around your projects. Paradoxically, it often strengthens your work by reconnecting you to the why beneath the what. People who serve regularly report increased meaning and decreased anxiety about relative status. When you remember that your success is one small thread in a vast fabric, you are less likely to suffocate in the weave of your own story. Time with the very young and the very old is clarifying. Children remind you of delight unmediated by achievement. Elders remind you of the brevity of the path. Ask an elder what they regret. Patterns emerge. Time lost to worry, relationships sacrificed to status, courage deferred. Ask a child what they enjoyed today. Patterns emerge. Play, attention, simple wonders. These are data points from ends of the spectrum we too rarely consult. Let them inform the middle where most of life unfolds. Designing a life that a child would find joyful and an elder would find wise is not naive. It is intelligent. Institutional context shapes personal options. If you are inside an organization that rewards only visible output and constant availability, your individual boundaries will be harder to maintain. Advocate for structural changes that make humane success possible. Examples include evaluating managers on team well-being metrics, instituting no meeting blocks company-wide, setting clear criteria for promotion that include mentorship and ethical leadership, and designing sabbaticals into tenure tracks. If advocacy fails and the environment remains extractive, consider that the prison may be the institution, not you. Leaving is not betrayal. It can be fidelity to your vocation. Mentorship across generations prevents the amnesia of each cohort. Younger professionals can lend speed, new tools, and cultural fluency. Older professionals can offer pattern recognition, historical context, and depth of craft. Pairing these strengths creates mutual humility. It also guards against a success culture that fetishizes novelty at the expense of wisdom or glorifies legacy at the expense of adaptation. In such intergenerational spaces, stories of recalibration become normal. The executive who stepped down to teach, the founder who chose profitability over hypergrowth to protect culture, the academic who shifted from publishing volume to mentoring depth. Narratives like these widen the social permission to choose differently. There is dignity in slow scaling. The market often prefers blitz scaling, grow fast, capture share, figure out sustainability later. The human heart prefers scaffolding. Grow at a rate that your systems, relationships, and conscience can handle. Slow scaling does not mean small ambition. It means paced ambition. It is the recognition that being able to do something is not the same as it being wise to do so now. Leaders who scale slowly invest in processes, redundancies, and culture. Their companies may not dominate headlines, but they dominate the quiet metrics that matter over decades. Employee retention, customer trust, ethical track record. Individuals who adopt slow scaling in their careers favor depth projects, mastery cycles, and deliberate plateaus where they consolidate skill before leaping. Plateaus are not stalls. They are stages where the roots grow deeper. Embrace impermanence as a teacher rather than an adversary. Every chapter ends. Titles change, audiences move on, markets shift, bodies age. If your identity is woven so tightly into a current role that change feels like annihilation, suffering becomes inevitable. Practices that cultivate comfort with impermanence, mindfulness, stoic reflection, contemplative traditions, soften your grip. You learn to hold honors and losses with equal gentleness. You practice pre-grieving, acknowledging that the chapter you love will end and choosing to love it anyway. This stance transforms choices. You are less likely to cling to roles past their ripeness and more likely to seed opportunities for those who will follow. You can step sideways without feeling you have stepped down. Let curiosity be a compass more trustworthy than fear. The question, "What am I afraid will happen if I stop doing this?" is useful. So is, "What am I curious to explore if I had even 2 hours a week?" Many significant life shifts begin with small curiosities entertained seriously. A language learned at night, a workshop taken on weekends, a community class that becomes a passion, a side project that becomes a practice. Success can make us impatient with small beginnings. We prefer the high-leverage move. But hearts change through humble experiments. Treat curiosity as R&D for your soul. Some experiments will yield nothing. Some will yield everything. Language around time deserves careful attention. When we say, "I don't have time," we often mean, "I have not made time." The distinction returns agency. Yes, constraints are real: caregiving, financial limits, systemic barriers. But within margins, choosing language that reflects choice strengthens the muscle of choice. Try replacing "I have to" with "I choose to," or "It's not a priority right now." If the latter phrase feels uncomfortable for something important, your health, your partner, your art, that discomfort is a signal to renegotiate. In teams, encourage honest time talk. Surface hidden workloads, name trade-offs, celebrate saying no to protect yes. The respect for time becomes a culture of respect for people. Gratitude is not a platitude. It is a discipline of attention that counters the hedonic treadmill. Success raises baselines. What once thrilled becomes normal, then insufficient. Gratitude interrupts this by savoring. Practice specific gratitude. Not, I'm grateful for my job, but I'm grateful for the colleague who asked about my mother and meant it. Not, I'm grateful for my home, but I'm grateful for the square of sunlight on the kitchen floor at 9 a.m. Specificity makes gratitude felt, and felt gratitude is protective. Studies link gratitude practices to improved mental health, better sleep, and stronger relationships, all buffers against the pressures that turn success into confinement. Forgiveness is an underappreciated lever of freedom. Without it, success narratives calcify around grievances. The slight that fueled your drive, the betrayal that hardened your stance, the criticism that became your inner drill sergeant. These can power a career, but at a cost. They burn dirty. Forgiveness is not excusing harm. It is releasing the right to live forever defined by it. When you forgive, you stop dragging the past as proof. You can still seek justice, set boundaries, and remember lessons. You simply stop organizing your identity around the wound. In this space, success lightens. It becomes less about proving and more about expressing what you are here to give. Humility keeps breadth in view. The more successful we become, the narrower our sample of feedback tends to be. People stop telling us when we are wrong. Humility counteracts this entropy. It is not self-abasement. It is accurate self-appraisal. It says, I am part of something larger, and my perspective is partial. Practice epistemic humility. Distinguish what you know, what you think, and what you are guessing. Invite dissent and reward it. Model changing your mind when presented with better evidence. This shifts cultures from defensive to adaptive, where learning outruns reputation management. In such cultures, success serves discovery, not the other way around. Art can be sanctuary and mirror. Whether you create or simply receive it, art expands the available space within. It asks you to feel beyond utility, to sit with ambiguity, to honor mystery. A poem can do in 14 lines what a strategy deck cannot. Reintroduce you to your own heart. Music can carry emotions you have been too busy to process. Visual art can widen your lens. Build regular encounters with art into your life. Let a museum be a place of meditation. Let a novel accompany your commute. Let a playlist score your transition from work to home. Art sands the sharp edges of your identity until you can rest your head against it. When success is shared, it stops echoing. Look for ways to decenter yourself in your own victories. Credit generously.
Sponsor Emerging Voices.
Design systems where the default is to pull others onto the stage. This is not only ethical, it is strategic. Teams that feel seen and empowered compound impact. And there is a quiet joy in walking off stage knowing the show can go on without you. That joy is the opposite of prison. It is freedom from indispensability theater. Perhaps the most radical move is to periodically answer this question as if nothing were at stake. If I could design my days from scratch, how would I structure them? Not in fantasy, but in detail: wake time, first hour, core work blocks, movement, meals, connection, learning, service, play, rest. Then ask, what is the minimum viable version of that day I can implement now, within my real constraints? Maybe it is 20 minutes of reading before email, a walk after lunch, one evening a week without screens, a standing phone call with a friend on Fridays. Implement, observe, adjust. As seasons change, redesign. Over time, these days begin to rhyme. A life emerges that is more you than the one you inherited. None of these practices guarantee that success will not, at times, feel confining. Responsibilities are real. Deadlines compress. Public roles come with scrutiny. But these practices strengthen the inner room you carry with you. They remind you that the self precedes the story, that being precedes doing, that the worth of a day is not the sum of its outputs but the quality of attention you gave to what mattered. In that room, you can sit quietly with your life, without audience, and feel that you are not performing it but living it. Let us return to the opening image, the summit that revealed itself as a narrow room. Imagine now that you discover a door you had missed. It does not lead down the mountain but across it, along a ridgeline, where the sky feels closer and the path is less crowded. You walk. The air is thinner but cleaner. You notice things. The shape of a cloud's shadow moving over a distant field. The way the light changes the color of stone, your own breath. Steadier now, from choosing a pace you can sustain. You meet others walking at their own pace. Some are faster, some slower. There is less jostling, less theater. You share water. You swap stories of valleys and storms. You laugh sometimes. You care for your knees. You let the horizon be horizon. Not a finish line, not a scoreboard, but a companion. And when the day ends, you rest, really rest, because you have learned that rest is not what you do after life. It is how you do life. In that rest, success ceases to be a prison. It becomes what it was meant to be all along. A means to serve what you love with a whole heart, for as long as you are given.